They've called that a slippery slope, a dangerous precedent, that politicizing, putting certain groups onto a terrorist.
It is a precedent, but it's an exciting one I'm actually pretty thrilled about, because at the end of the day, if we can now start designating white supremacy as not only terrorist organizations, but as an imminent threat to the lives of Canadians, there's going to be a couple more dots to connect where we can start to show that the actual upholding of power structures and of white supremacy itself happens under capitalism. So then I think we might have some eager minds to mold. All right, this is very cool. I didn't know this. In Vancouver, the Squamish Nation shapes a sustainable village of 9,000. Imagine it's 2035 as you look, and this is really going to piss off the Anprims. Sorry, Anprims, but we're moving forward. All right, even Indigenous people, we're going straight to the moon. We're Dogecoin in it. We're going to Dogecoin it all the way. It's 2035. As you look across Falls Creek towards downtown Vancouver, the two arms of a ceremonial gate rise alongside the Burrard Street Bridge. It's flanked by dozens of towers, their facades punctuated by by imagery by Indigenous artists, surrounded by green landscapes of copse of red cedar. This is the Vancouver in which the Squamish Nation has had a strong presence on the skyline and a serious impact on the city, having built 6,000 homes in a new neighborhood called Senac. 14 months after the proposal was publicly introduced, the architecture was largely complete, and it has evolved. The expression of the Squamish values is becoming more and more clear, said Kilnissim, a Squamish councillor who's leading the project for his nation in partnership with the developers Westbank. They plan to start construction late this year. Kilnissim recently walked me through the project together with its lead architect, Venelin Kokalov of the Reverie Architecture. It will be the largest and most prominent example yet of Indigenous city building in North America, and its urban design breaks dramatically with convention. Senac will be compact, green, and dense, bringing public life across the site and below ground. The 4 million square foot complex will occupy 3.7 hectare fragments of traditional Squamish land along the Falls Creek. So, if y'all don't know this, because this is a little bit of local news, in Vancouver, the Squamish Nation won a monstrous lawsuit which gave them some of the most bougie and valuable property in Vancouver. And I kid you not, it's oceanfront property, and it's enormous. It's one of the biggest land back victories in Canada. Like, amazing news, incredibly poggers. Not only is it incredible news, and they won this land back settlement, and they got this huge amount of land, they're using it, which, like, of course they're doing this. They're building sustainable, compact green housing where, like, people will be afford to live in, which will be a huge change for Vancouver. But, yeah, like, just incredible news all around. Great news. Happy news for a change. Yeah, like, based. All I can really say. The project, which is not subject to city regulation, now consists of 12 buildings ranging from 17 to 59 stories. Since last year, the Squamish West Bank have added an office tower. This will include low-emission construction and energy-efficient architecture, very few private cars, and a rich mix of activities. Because we're in control as landowners and developers, there are many opportunities to shape the aspects of the project. This is so cool for so many different reasons, by the way, because, like, I am not an Anprim in any way, shape, or form. I love technology. And I'm guessing most people here, whether you want to admit it or not, you do too. You probably just don't want people in other nations to have to, like, live and die mining the minerals to make it for you. You probably want it to be a little bit more sustainable, but that doesn't mean you don't love video games. Like me, you probably love video games. I almost just completed Fall of the Jedi, and I'm also working on the second newer Tomb Raider game at the same time. And I love the video games. I just don't think people should have to suffer and work terrible crunch in order to make them. And if you're going to answer me, well then, Lance, how will these things ever take place? You need the crunch. Without the crunch, you'll never get people who spend endless hours on the details to make the tree in that one scene really pop. And then if you want millions of trees and forests to pop, it takes just seas of people. It takes just enormous human labor to make that kind of stuff for you. It wouldn't if you didn't need proprietary engines for so many different companies and games. If you could actually share resources, like if you had open source software that allowed you to share resources amongst multiple people, so you wouldn't have to design stuff from scratch every single time, you could actually pool those resources. And also, instead of using deep AI and machine learning to, say, again, do proprietary shit, you were capable of using it to also help multiply and generate those kind of resources. It would take way less labor hours. You would need way less human suffering to make that shit. You know, open source software is a beautiful thing. I'm for technology. I love it. I just want it to be more efficient, less wasteful, and less horrible for human beings. I think that's I think that's the modern age. So anyways, this is kind of like a self-realization of this. I mean, it looks really interesting. It's going to be completely green. It's going to be interwoven with green development. I mean, Vancouver, for all the shit I'd take on this city, which is that it's filled with like really bougie assholes, it does have a very big green initiative and always has, which is kind of neat. They've been trying to become a zero carbon city for a long time. All this would be marked by that gateway designed by an indigenous artist. There's a strong desire to express Squamish identity through the public realm. This is cool. This is really, really cool. I'm gonna keep my ear to the ground on this story. I have more good news, by the way, out of the Made Up Land of Canada. Let me see if I can find it.
Domestic terrorism fueled by ultra right-wing groups are the most pressing and real threat to not just Canadian security, but in the US, around the world, we're seeing that these are the groups that are responsible for massive killings.
Jagmeet Singh says it's time for Canada to designate the Proud Boys as a terrorist organization. The all-male far-right group openly advocates for violence as a solution to political problems and has already been labeled an extremist group by the FBI. But Canada has yet to put the group on its list of terror organizations.
Well, I am happy to announce that changed. That changed today. It had previously changed by passing the House. It is now passed through the Senate. It is official. The Proud Boys are terrorists in Canada. It's deeply concerning. There's been an escalation, not only in rhetoric, but security and planning. Countering this group has become an important priority for our government. Canada is the first country to designate the all-male group as terrorists, akin to the Taliban, an international Sikh youth federation, and dozens of other dangerous groups. Last month, MPs voted unanimously to call on the government to add them to the terror list. Following the storming of Capitol Hill in Washington, Proud Boys have been under watch. Multiple media reports have linked the Proud Boy members to those who stormed Capitol Hill after a speech by then U.S. President Donald Trump. Yeah, a lot of the people who've been arrested and charged are Proud Boys. A self-described organizer of the Proud Boys has been arrested for taking part in the siege. A security official speaking on the background said the Proud Boys have been under review for some time, and the attack was not the only driving factor in designating the group as a terrorist entity. We've been looking at this group for a while. Oh, Gavin McInnes, you keep popping up on the news. That's weird. I mean, like, of all the accomplishment Gavin McInnes has done, one of them is forming a terrorist organization akin to the Taliban. Conservative MP Shannon Stubbs, the party's critic for public safety, said the Tories will always support measures to keep Canadians safe, white supremacist hate groups, but Stubbs said the Liberal government has been soft on extremism because it does not impose sanctions on the Iranian agents responsible for shooting down flight PS752 last year that killed 55 Canadians and 30 permanent residents. Man, that was last year. Wow. That's wild. That feels like it was like 10 years ago. Here's the full list of the 13 new terrorist entities. Atomwaffen. Fuck yeah. Fuck you, Atomwaffen. No more list from Andy No coming into Canada. The Base, the Proud Boys, Russian Imperial Movement, 3 Al-Qaeda affiliates. I cannot pronounce that. The Wal Muslimin Front de Libération de Messina and Ansar Dine. 5 ISIS affiliates. Islamic State, West Africa Province, Islamic State in Greater Sahara, Islamic State in Libya, Islamic State, East Asia, and the Islamic State, Bangladesh, and Hizbul Mujahideen.
Symbolic, or do you think there's going to be real impacts to networks like the Proud Boys and how they function in Canada?
I think absolutely there's going to be real impacts. First, I want to say this is a good day. Secondly, I want to acknowledge and recognize the thousands of Canadians that supported our call to ban this group, to ban the Proud Boys. And I'm proud to have been in the House of Commons to present the motion, to called on the House to say we need to end this. We need to tackle white supremacy and start by naming the Proud Boys as a terrorist group. The reason why this is also important is in the context of the past 4 years. What Donald Trump did as president was embolden racists, embolden hate groups. He actively did it. And what should have been a climate that discouraged these types of groups, they should have been ashamed of these beliefs, they were emboldened. They were
Sex
louder.
work
They were
could be
promoting their
considered a
message
legit
more.
form of
And
civil
what this,
disobedience.
I
I was like, oh, that's very loud. No one donate for 2 minutes while I listen to this.
hope does is has a chilling effect on these groups. They need to know that there is no place for hateful division designed to inspire violence against minority groups, that this type of rhetoric has no place. Groups that promote this have no place in Canada. Frankly, it should have no place in the world. And this is a big step to saying we have to acknowledge that in the past, security forces have ignored the real and urgent threat of white supremacists and of extreme right-wing groups. They've ignored them, and because of that historic ignorance of these groups, it has resulted in Canadians losing their lives and people around the world being more at risk. That is a problem with systemic racism, is that resources get applied in a way where they do not protect Canadians. And we saw that in the States. The open threats by these extreme right-wing groups and by these white supremacist groups were ignored, and the entire institution was under attack. The whole point of these security agencies is to protect the fundamental democratic institutions, and they failed miserably, which exposes how much systemic racism leaves people in danger. And that's why today is a good step forward, because it's realigning our resources with the real threats.
You brought up the motion you put forward in the House of Commons. I want to get your comment on what some national security experts have said. They've called that a slippery slope, a dangerous precedent, that politicizing, putting certain groups onto a terrorist.
It is a precedent, but it's an exciting one I'm actually pretty thrilled about, because at the end of the day, if we can now start designating white supremacy as not only terrorist organizations, but as an imminent threat to the lives of Canadians, there's going to be a couple more dots to connect where we can start to show that the actual upholding of power structures and of white supremacy itself happens under capitalism. So then I think we might have some eager minds to mold. I think it's an important stepping stone.
This list is something that should stay out of the House of Commons and remain within national security organizations, for risk of putting other groups perhaps on that list because of political reasons in the future.
That's gotta be a conservative news outlet asking that question, by the way. Do you not think it's a little dangerous politicizing terrorism, or what groups, or racism, or perhaps, white supremacy? Why would we politicize white supremacy? It's quite apolitical in nature, really, And
also making it more difficult to prosecute groups like the Proud Boys because there was some politicization of getting them on that list. How do you respond to those national security experts?
A very fair question and very important question. And I want to delineate two things. One is the systemic approach to how we assess risks. It should absolutely be done in an evidence-based way, with experts evaluating the real evidence and then making a decision based on that evidence. No question about it. That is the way things should be done. And I encourage that to be the way things are done moving forward and always. But here is the problem. That evidence was ignored. The evidence of the real threat posed by white supremacists and by extreme right-wing groups was ignored. In that context, then it is a moral imperative for leaders to stand up and say, hey, something is going on here. The evidence is being ignored. We are calling on you to realign the resources towards the real threats. And that has been the problem. And I want to be very specific. A certain threat was ignored completely. Other threats were given more importance, which was contrary to the evidence. At that point, I think political leaders should step up and say, something is wrong here. And that's what I did. And that's what I think is vital that we do. The systemic approach to how we evaluate risk should absolutely remain evidence-based. Experts should evaluate it and make that decision. But when they are not doing their job, or when they're ignoring the real threats, then it becomes important for a leader to stand up and say, hey, these groups have been ignored. It's put Canadians at risk. That needs to end. That's what we did. We pointed out something that was really clear from what we saw in the States, that a certain group of threats are being ignored. And we wanted to highlight how risky and dangerous they are to Canadians, and how important it is for us to take those threats seriously.
Jordan?
Good afternoon, Mr. Singh. Just to follow up a bit. So in your mind then, is it necessary you said there was a problem with the system. So shouldn't you be addressing the system in some ways, as opposed to just saying we're going to list entities? I'm hoping you can explain what then has to change in the system so that you don't have to stand up again and say, hey, you're not doing your job.
That is a really good question, and I think it's going to take a lot of work on the part of security experts to answer that question, what they could do to be more responsive to the real threats. I think that's where political leaders should step in, is when the threats are being ignored, we say, hey, there's a mistake being made. A part of the checks and balances is that there is a role that leaders can play. And one of those roles is to say, if something is going on that's not right, to stand up and say, there's a problem here. Ideally, though, the system shouldn't make these mistakes. How we fix that in the future, how we ensure the system is more accurately evaluating the real threats and not ignoring them, might take a lot of work. It might require us to reevaluate the biases that that security forces have, that people have, the biases that have resulted in white supremacists and extreme right-wing groups being ignored historically when they do pose the real threats, that is something that is going to take a lot of deep reflection. And it is a very fair question to be asking. In the context where the mistakes have been made, it is important to stand up and correct them. Ideally, I'd love a system that was able to do it itself.
And then so this is as a follow-up to something else that you were talking about before, because there's civil liberties groups that obviously had said there are other options than just simply listing groups as terrorist entities. Do you see that's, in your opinion, are those other options viable to address the concerns you have about white supremacists in this country, or is listing them as terrorist entities the only way that we're ever going to deal with this?
Well, there's two different things here. In the existing context, with the existing laws that we have, resources are applied in a certain way. In that context, I want the resources to go towards the real threats. And the current context is terrorist laws. But beyond that, I believe that the criticisms of terrorist laws are very valid, that approach has been one that has been used systematically against racialized people in an unjust way. It has targeted indigenous groups, environmental groups, and that is the wrong approach. And so moving forward, I think I would like to see happen.
The only shitty news I have now, just to bring everyone back down from the sun, because everyone's probably like, wow, Canada seems so based. They're building these like brand new, sustainable, low-cost housing in Vancouver that are being made by Indigenous people, and the profits are going to go towards Indigenous people, and it's part of the land back movement, and they won a whole bunch of land in the most expensive, bougie part of the city, and now they're making the Proud Boys into a terrorist group. Wow, Canada sounds like a wonderful place, full of happiness, joy, and candy. Well, also today, on February 3rd, Canada is the only G7 country to take vaccines from a fund for developing countries. That's right. We're taking money away from the countries that need it that won't be getting the vaccine until 2023. Canada is the only G7 country to draw on a supply of COVID-19 vaccines meant primarily for developing countries, according to a new data released Wednesday. The COVAX program, coordinated with the World Health Organization and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, pools funds from wealthier countries to buy vaccines for themselves and for 92 low and middle income nations that can't afford to buy them on their own. Information released Wednesday by Gavi shows Canada is among just a few rich countries exercising their option to buy the vaccines from the international group. The vast majority of countries receiving the first vaccine shipments from COVAX are low to middle income countries. But Canada, that is already buying up vaccines like wildfire, it was like, we want those ones too. Other wealthy countries on the list receiving the vaccines include New Zealand and Singapore. Oh, New Zealand. New Zealand, the other sock-dem land utopia that everyone's in love with. Curious. I thought the rates were at a record low in New Zealand too. Very curious. Not really suffering too much there. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government has come under intense political pressure for vaccine rollout in its first 2 months and has been beset by delays, repeatedly lowering expectations amid a global supply crunch with only a few COVID-19 vaccines approved. Our contribution to the global mechanism has always intended to access vaccine doses for Canadians, as well to support lower income countries. We're having a comprehensive approach to fighting the pandemic, as we now know the virus won't be defeated until it's defeated everywhere. COVAX has a pecking order and it prioritizes self-funded countries like Canada. It's not based on global health needs. It's based on how much money a country is able to put into COVAX. Wow. So Canada's buying it out. It's buying it out with all the country. It's the Nickelback of countries. Yeah, pretty much. Man, Canada and New Zealand, the two shits. Canada's claiming it'll donate the vaccines to low to middle income countries after, but it's still sus. Oh, so it's basically, even that is kind of rude. You know what that means? That's like, well, hey, we're going to buy up all the vaccines, and then once we're all taken care of, we're going to help you out. It's a model that we're going to model after Israel. Because Israel, that's what they wanted to do, right? Like, Israel's almost completely vaccinated. Well, unless you count the illegal occupation of the Palestinian people. And then there's quite a few other people who haven't been vaccinated at all. We're 27th in vaccinating. I know. If we're hogging, then we're not doing a good job of hogging, so it's not so bad. Well, it's still bad if you're taking it from the countries that aren't going to be getting it until 2023. I would disagree with that. Absolutely. There's a finite amount of vaccines that exist in the world today. It's important for Canada to clarify now how it can take its cake and eat it too. For many poorer countries, COVAX will be the main source of the vaccines. Most have not received any vaccines so far. In Africa, for example, only about 230,000 vaccines have been administered. I mean, one of the reasons this is fucked up is because, like, life isn't as bad to be in quarantine in Canada than it is in some of these other countries. Like, it can be horrible. It can be horrific. I'm not trying to downplay anyone's suffering. But if you're at home playing Dark Souls, it's slightly better than if you're in some of these conditions, right? Like, you should probably be working to make sure that everyone is getting the rollout of the vaccine, especially the countries that might not have the infrastructure to deal with the surplus of like bodies that start going to hospitals and doing that. I literally played Call of Duty for half my work. True, Dark Souls is fucking hard, and the new one for PS5 looks great.
If you want us to advertise your channel or work, please go to weareserfs.com and email us a 20 to 30 second ad, and we'll take it on to the end of one of our videos to help promote your leftist channel or progressive something. Whatever you do.
To our gods, I'm Raph, Xander Corvus, and Schlatsky. We shall build golden idols in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, you have our undying fealty. To our lords, Jeffrey Lamb, Trevor R., Hans Josephen, C. Bartlett, Jimothy K. Meeple Beeps Jr., Bisexual Black Gamer, and Trofox, we shall carry your banners onto the battlefield. To our Knights of the Round Table, Josh Mickelson, Dylan Byte, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, Political Puppy, Jimmy Bignuts, Andreas Chitoro, Good Poon Hates Cops, that's solid poon then, Dr. Zayas, Yoppie, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Thomas Barrington, J. Fraser Cartwright, Goofalankius, Melissa Murphy, Nicholas Marks, Alexander Thaler, Ali Rada Jafer, Alex Gauvin, Radical Maniac, The Great Houdini, and Callie Kotka. We salute you.